valleys of South Wales have a unique visual drama. I know of no other landscape where urban fingers press so deeply and closely into a wild, rugged upland. These valleys have inspired artists for more than 2 centuries. First, they were attracted by the natural wilderness, but soon it was industry that fueled their artistic imagination. Here was the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. An artist came here to record these extraordinary scenes. But artists didn't just portray the power of industry, they also showed the struggles of the people who worked within it. This was the world that I was born into, and which formed me politically, as I became first a union official, and then a local member of parliament and government minister. But this place also inspired me to go to art college and dream of following in the footsteps of these artists. I'm going to look at how artists have described the valleys for 250 years. But I also want to ask if they're trapped in a past so powerful that it's difficult to throw off. Very few artists describe the valleys as they are now. That story doesn't have the brutal romance of a coalfield racked with danger, disease, resilience and struggle. This isn't what you think of as the valleys, but this is what first drew artists here 250 years ago. This is the Vale of Neath, with its wooded valleys and its waterfalls. It's a real beauty spot, as it was in the late 18th century, when artists journeyed hundreds of miles to come here and paint its unspoiled landscape. Industry was already present. There were ironworks and foundries tucked into the valleys. But that wasn't what attracted artists. They came here for this wilderness.
Towards the end of the 18th century, artists did start travelling to the South Wales valleys, particularly in the 1790s. One very famous artist came, and that was, of course, Turner.
So Turner came here from London. That must have been quite a journey.
It was an epic journey in those days, before trains. He travelled on horseback, on foot, by boat, carrying a large sketchbook, a small sketchbook, his painting box, his bag. He was a young man, and he was a very intrepid spirit, very adventurous. And he set off in the summers on these trips that would last weeks. And if you think of it, these were places that were uncharted territory for him.
So in Turner's day, the valleys were a kind of frontier.
You could say that. It was before the valleys had actually felt the full impact of the Industrial Revolution. But for him, I think it was the nature, this very awe-inspiring nature that drew him here, that inspired him.
So this must have been the spot he painted this from.
I would say that he painted this on this very spot, yes.
Why would he have come here? He couldn't go to Europe.
There was the French Revolutionary Wars in Europe, so artists couldn't travel to Europe. He'd studied at the Royal Academy from the age of 15. He was a landscape artist. He needed source material If you were a young artist in London and wanted a wide range of landscapes, be it picturesque or wild and sublime like this, Wales was a good place for him to come. So for him, he was seeking maybe the extreme in nature, what we call the sublime landscape that fills you with awe, that fills you with fear and admiration at the same time. And I think under this thundering waterfall, he certainly would have found that.
The waterfalls that inspired Turner also powered the ironworks and foundries that were springing up around here. And as the 19th century dawned, artists became less concerned with the spectacle of nature and more interested in the drama of industry. With skies blackened by smoke from the furnaces, artists weren't separate from these new industries, but also worked in them. Thomas Horner was a land surveyor who also painted the estates of the Valley's ironmasters. Two of his key works are kept in the National Museum in Cardiff. Beth, what have we got here?
Well, we've got this rather extraordinary work by the artist Thomas Horner that came out of an album. And this page is actually hinged and would have actually in the book opened up to reveal this extraordinary image below, this wonderful vision of the Valley of Neath. As you can see, as well as depicting the landscape, we have this wonderful kind of orchestra of angels almost up in the sky.
But at the same time as he was inventing these visions, he was also painting the new industry of the valleys.
Yeah, so the book is actually a tour where you go through the valley, and as part of that tour, he visits some sites of industry. So again, we can compare that work with this work, which is further up, taken from Merthyr, and this is the Penydarren Ironworks, very dramatically lit, and he's chosen to do it at night time so that he can accentuate all the fire and the industry and make it much more dramatic. So yeah, you can see really a progression from painting the landscape to actually artists becoming fascinated by the vibrancy of the industry that was happening.
So you've got two landowners essentially commissioning Thomas Horner to paint what they're proud of. Somebody wanting to paint this beautiful Vale of Neath, and you've got another landowner who wanted to show off this cutting-edge industry, the new blast furnaces and rolling mills.
Yeah, so they're showing, the land that they're developing in their houses, but they're also showing the industry and how they're making their money.
The richest of the ironmasters were the Crawshay family. With the millions they made, the Crawshays built this mansion, Cyfarthfa Castle in Merthyr, to keep an eye on their empire. It still has the feeling of new money, showing off its power to the neighbours and to the people who did the work for them. Generations of Crawshays stared down from these walls. They were stern industrialists who ruled with a will of iron. But the most impressive paintings here are on a much less grand scale. What have we got here then?
This is a watercolour of Cyfarthfa Ironworks by Penry Williams. It was commissioned by William Crawshay II, the ironmaster, around about 1824-25 when the castle was built, a series of watercolours to be given as a birthday present to his second wife, Isabel Crochet. So you can see the ironworks here, all the work going on, the workers in the foreground as well, and the engine houses in the back.
And this massive smoke and flames going on.
Yeah, you can imagine the smog lighting up the sky and the smell. You just get a feeling of it from the painting itself.
You must have been able to see Merthyr from many miles.
Yeah, miles away. And when it was night time, you would have been able to see big orange flames up in the night sky.
So why would Crochet have wanted this to be painted?
There's very few pictures done in the 1820s. Obviously this is before photography as well. I think it was to show off his wealth and his status, really.
He would have commissioned Henry Williams to do these and all of the others.
That's right, because he'd spotted his talent early on. Henry Williams had been here with his father. His father was a painter and a stonemason, and Henry came along on one of his jobs, and he was sketching one day, this is reputedly, and William Crochet II saw his talent, and along with John Josiah Guest, Dowlas Ironmaster, they both made sure that they patronised him to go to the Royal Academy to develop his skills further.
And because they needed somebody, didn't they, to record these great works.
Exactly,
and this wealth and status that they had.
Exactly, local boy made good.
Now, this is one of the most famous images of the Industrial Revolution.
That's right, yeah, there's very rare images of actually the work going on inside one of these rolling mills. It's a very unique image, and you can only imagine the heat, the noise, the smell as well. But
and the scale is huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you can actually see what the men are doing here. So Henry Williams, the artist, he must have been very familiar with the work that the men did.
He probably would have been very friendly with them and known them as well, because I mean he was from the poor side of the tracks, as they say. That's actually the castle in the background, looking down very imperiously towards the ironworks, so that William Crochet could very easily see what was going on in the ironworks just down below.
These workers must have been very pleased seeing that huge castle up there. It's really rubbing these people's noses in it.
Yeah, I can
imagine. There's this vast house which would cost millions to build now. All the money made out of this enterprise here, of the labour of these people, would have looked up and seen this very, very grand house, one of the grandest houses in Wales,
right,
lit up in the night.
Yeah, exactly.
When they were living in one up, one down.
Living in one up, one down, working in very hard conditions.
Crochet and his fellow iron barons amassed huge wealth and created temples to industry. In the middle of another Henry Williams painting are the extraordinary Butte Ironworks in the Rumney Valley, an amazing building with chimneys inspired by the Dendera Temple of the Upper Nile. Just think, an Egyptian temple in the South Wales valleys. There's nothing left of the Egyptian extravaganza, and many of the old ironworks are ruins now. Arches and towers that only hint at the power and noise they once generated. Tucked away in a scrapyard is an old factory that doesn't look much now, but was once an industrial marvel. By the middle of the 19th century, South Wales was fast becoming the engine room of Britain's Industrial Revolution. Ironworks and coal mines were springing up right across the valleys. It's difficult to imagine the scale of these works now. Only ruins remain. The Crochet's tin plate works, just outside Treforest, is one of the most complete. It's still in the metal business, but selling scrap now. When it was built in 1835, it was the largest tin plate works in the world, supplying metal across the empire and also to the USA. Like the ironworks in Merthyr, it was recorded in popular prints, but there's one important thing missing from them. Being in this extraordinary building, you can see why artists were so attracted to the new industrial enterprises, the ironworks and the foundries and the tin works. I mean, look at this picture. The drama of that light coming out of the blast furnaces in the night. The people, the men and women who made the wealth, they're very small, very difficult to see them. But there is one collection of paintings where you can actually see their faces. A series of remarkable portraits of the men who worked in the Treforest factory has recently come to light. These 16 tiny paintings, now at the National Museum in Cardiff, give us a glimpse of the early industrial workers. But these are very unusual paintings, aren't they, from the mid-1830s?
Yes, they're a wonderful group that we have. We have a selection here. There are in fact 16, and they're all paintings showing the workers of Francis Crawshay. And they're all shown in this very distinctive style, set in a landscape, mainly with the sky behind. And we think they're by the artist William Jones Chapman. He's an artisan artist, although they're only attributed to him at the moment. And they're all named and identified. So we have some skilled workers, we have some unskilled workers, we have managers, and they're quite extraordinary because they show them, as you can see, as individuals, and he captures the character and the facial features of each worker. No women, I should mention, as well in the group. It's all 16 are male workers.
This is a manager here.
Yeah, this is John Davis, so he's the tin manager. And I think you can see the difference really with the clothes. He's obviously not hands-on. You can feel him as a person. I think that comes across very much. And that's quite unusual, you know, for workers to be depicted in this way.
Oh yeah, great care has been taken. I mean, the faces are beautifully painted and very sympathetically painted, aren't they?
Yes, and they're all identified as well. So we know, for instance, that this is William James and that he was a roller, and he's here pictured with the tools of his trade. So, you know, he's taking pride in his job.
It gives them real dignity, which is quite right, of course, because these were the people who created the wealth.
Indeed, they were very important to the owners. They needed their workers to continue to make the money.
But these portraits only tell half the story. Conditions in the Crawshay's iron and tin plate works were harsh and dangerous. Just 4 years before they were painted, the workers were pushed to breaking point. This is one of the bedrooms of Cyfarthfa Castle, the former mansion of the Crawshays. They weren't popular. In 1831, the workers of Merthyr rose up against the poverty and starvation they were suffering. The red flag was unfurled for the first time. The rising was put down brutally, and one man, Dick Penderyn, was taken to Cardiff and hanged, allegedly because he was the leader of the rising. At the time, there was no visual record of the Merthyr Rising, or of the conditions the workers were protesting about. The Iron Barons didn't want the hard reality of industrial South Wales to be seen. Occasionally, artists did look at the ordinary people of the valleys. Tip girls were paid to carry coal and ashes from the iron foundries. And Thomas probably wanted to portray the harshness of their lives. But this is such a romantic image that she might have been carrying a Greek urn. But historian Ellen Jones has her own theory about the painting.
The title Sackcloth and Ashes, I thought it referred to the shame of these women earning their bread by the sweat of their brow. But in fact it refers to society's shame, that women are still earning their living in this way, comparatively late to the 19th century.
And when this was painted, would it have been commissioned to make that message?
I don't know. Was it commissioned or was it the artist painted himself? He was a very evangelical Christian with strong views about the role of women in society, and he did think it was shameful that women be employed in hard labour outside the home. So it's quite possible that he was inspired, trained by the classical images, but portraying what he thought was a social problem of society not giving women their proper place and their proper dignity.
Recently, a collection of portraits has emerged from the shadows of history that show women in the valleys as they really were, this time through a new medium, photography. Ellen, who are these photographs of exactly?
Well, these are photographs taken in about 1865 of women in the ironworks in Tredegar, taken by a local photographer. And what is special about these pictures is that they are very, very rare. There aren't very many pictures of workers. There are very few pictures of women workers taken, it seems, some of them actually in the works, because this one seemed to have a stone wall behind her. Some of them seem to be more shot in a studio, like this one here. But they are very immediate, they're very detailed, and show us all the sort of sense of hard labour that these women were doing. These women were working in physical work in the ironworks.
How would people in 1865 have felt about women working in ironworks, coal mines and so on?
They would probably been viewed as rough, tough women, common, as my grandmother would say. She was born in 1878 and she had a very strong view about common women, and she would have been shocked, for example, to see these women wearing trousers.
That is very rare.
That's a shocking image. Shocking image, because they are wearing trousers that show the shape of their legs above the knee, Kim, above the knee, and they're wearing these aprons. But these people were really the lowest of the low.
These women workers in Tredegar were part of a massive social change in the valleys. The mines and the ironworks and the railways were hungry for workers, and the massive inward migration transformed these valleys and created this now famous iconography of rows of terraced houses stacked up the hillsides, squeezed between the mines in the bottom of the valleys and the wildernesses on the top. But the life for this new population was grim, with tens of thousands squeezed into rapidly built pit villages, working underground in coal mines fraught with danger. There emerged a passion for change, and the people who came to work in the valleys were amongst the most radicalised in the world. Coming from across Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom, they soon joined together in chapels and trade unions. At the heart of every community was the welfare hall or Miners' Institute. The coal industry was booming, but wages and conditions weren't improving. Workers organised themselves into trade unions, and buildings like this were raised by subscription from their meagre earnings. But life in these tough valleys communities wasn't portrayed by painters. The art that celebrated the coming of industry to the valleys didn't show the realities of life there. The only pictorial record of this time is in newspaper and magazine illustrations, often showing the aftermath of the all-too-frequent pit disasters. But one pioneering cartoonist in Wales gives a remarkable insight into how these turbulent times were represented in the popular press. His name, Joseph Morwood Staniforth. So Chris, what is this book of cartoons?
Well, J.M. Staniforth was the cartoonist for the Western Mail and the Evening Express in Cardiff, and he drew cartoons throughout the 6-month dispute in 1898, and at the end of it, the Western Mail published them as a separate pamphlet for threepence.
So these are really the only visual record of a very important strike.
Yeah, I mean, this is pre-photography in newspapers, so you've got people who are sketch artists, and then you've got these cartoons which are acts of interpretation. And every day he is drawing something, following the progress of the dispute, responding to the things that are cropping up and the changing public attitudes around the positions of the miners and the mine owners.
But as the politics of the coalfield changes, so does Staniforth's depiction of South Wales coal miners.
It does. What you have here, 1898, you have a collier who is respectable, solid, hard-working, knows his place in society, somebody who's deserving of some measure of respect. Later on, we've got one here, 11 years on, you've got a collier who is much less comfortable. He is threatening, he's more animalistic, and I think that transition represents increasing concern on the part of the cartoonist and possibly therefore by society at large over what was happening in the coalfield.
And how many people would have seen these images?
The Western Mail's got a circulation of approaching 100,000 at this time. He was also drawing for the News of the World, so he was reaching possibly over 1 million people by the early 20th century.
And in a way, that's how South Wales got known then.
Yeah, South Wales was, of course, the home of the South Wales coal industry. It was the hub of the economic hub of the British Empire, as it were. It powered the Royal Navy. All of Britain's greatness could be predicated on what was going on in South Wales.
So these cartoons must have been one of the ways in which people actually discovered the valleys.
I suppose so, because people didn't travel to the valleys as tourist areas. These were places of some mystery, didn't necessarily encounter miners going about their daily business. There were relatively few photographs of works of art that represented the mining valleys. Cartoons, however, were appearing in daily newspapers and conveying something through imagery of what these societies were like.
Another glimpse of the protests in the valleys from the early years of the 20th century comes from an extraordinary set of photographs. A photographer in Tonypandy, Levi Ladd, took pictures of striking miners meeting there in 1910, just before their violent confrontation with the police. The fragile glass plate negatives were mostly lost, but a handful have survived and give us a vivid image of the politics of this time. The years around the First World War saw peak production in the South Wales coalfield. Out of the tens of thousands of people working, there emerged a new generation of artists. For the first time since Penry Williams in Merthyr, they'd grown up alongside the colliers and their families. Trained at Swansea School of Art, they brought a new realism to the portrayal of this industrial world. Evan Walters was the oldest, and in the 1920s and early 1930s, he painted a series of images of coal miners that still impress today. Not widely known, they are rare portraits of working men, painted with a deep understanding of who they were and the conditions they faced. The portraits date from the year of the general strike onwards. They show men pinched by hunger as the Great Depression brought desperate poverty to the valleys. Chris, after the First World War, of course, the coal industry crashed.
Yeah.
The demand for coal is dropping dramatically.
Yeah, particularly in South Wales. You've got new industries like oil and electricity coming through. You've got a lot of competition in the export market. And so South Wales coal, which had been really, top quality, is now struggling. It's high price and they're finding it difficult to shift. And what that means is that you get mines beginning to close and large numbers of miners being laid off. And within 10 years, you're looking at a really serious unemployment problem in South Wales.
But it's also the time, isn't it, when artists start to try to reflect this pain in their own work.
Well, you've got artists like Evan Walters, for instance, who starts to paint portraits in the South Wales coalfield in the mid-1920s. So this is at a point when the industry is really struggling for its very existence, and so are the communities. You've got the general strike, you've got the 7-month-long lockout of 1926, and then widespread unemployment that comes hard on the heels of that. And what you've got with those portraits are real miners. These are real people living in South Wales who've experienced that kind of human tragedy. Their whole raison d'etre has disappeared because the industry is shrunk and they no longer have the means of making a living. And I think you can see that the tragedy, it's written in the art. These people are real examples of this economic catastrophe.
And artists weren't just painting portraits, they were also painting the reality of mining.
Yeah, somebody like Vincent Evans, the paintings that he does of miners underground working, you get a real strong sense of the physicality of that labour. It's not brought out in any other way at that time, I think, except perhaps through works of literature like George Orwell's Road to Wigan Pier. You've got a sense of the muscles, the sweat, the pain, the claustrophobic environment. So for miners in work, the work itself hadn't changed very much, from the late Victorian Edwardian period. And that's captured in those paintings.
And were those paintings regarded as proper things to go into art galleries at the time?
Well, I think there's a struggle there, in a sense. Industrial art is still trying to find its way in the artistic environment of the early 20th century. And that's why so many of these painters have to find other subjects to make their careers through.
These were hard years in the South Wales valleys, with colliery closures, mass unemployment and near starvation. Few pictures show this, but a painting by another Swansea student, Archie Rhys-Griffiths, catches the mood. Griffiths has his blackened automatons approaching the viewer from a valley whose hills are more grey than green, beneath a sky that promises bad weather. Radicalism and socialism continue to grow. Mardy, at the head of the Run of the Valley, was dubbed Little Moscow in 1930. Evan Waldus's painting, The Communist, depicts this political world. Here's the orator, decked out in a bright red shirt, exhorting the masses to revolution. Waldus never wrote about this painting, so we don't know if it's in support of the communist or if it's supposed to be satirizing him. Those paintings of the 1920s and 30s became symbols of the struggle against the worst aspects of capitalism. They attracted to the valleys artists, writers and filmmakers who took those images out to the wider world. Two European artists came to the valleys during the war and were highly influential. Both were Jewish, Joseph Herman from Poland and Heinz Koppel from Germany. They never met, even though they worked at the same time. One promoted an image of the dignified miner. The second helped usher in the idea of the valleys as an imaginative dreamscape. Joseph Herman became celebrated for his portraits of Welsh miners. He was inspired by a vision of men returning home from the pit in Ystrad Gunlais, silhouetted against the sunset. Herman lived in the village and went underground to sketch the men at work. His fame grew after he painted a huge mural of miners for the Festival of Britain in 1951. These sculpted figures, influenced by African carvings, became some of the best-known images of the Welsh valleys. think for Joseph Herman, coal mining was what he referred to as dignified labour. You know, he saw it as being real men's work, producing something real that was a commodity that was going to get sold. And it was hard labour, and there was something that he really valued in that. He'd grown up in a Warsaw ghetto with his whole family living in one room and his father working as a cobbler. This was a completely different idea, that you'd see these miners coming out of the sunset and crossing the bridge and going off down the pit. And he saw the sort of masculinity and the power of that, but he also saw it in a slightly romantic way as the wealth being brought up from under the earth, the fires being burnt with it, and something about nature being expressed, rock underneath our feet being brought to the surface. So there was a sort of timeless energy that he felt was in that whole story. He was deeply moved by the quality he found in that community and the landscape, and desperately wanted to start painting it, and stayed for a decade.
Heinz Koppel lived in Dowlais near Merthyr, and while he was less well known than Herman, his influence on art in the valleys was also profound.
He was teaching unemployed miners, kids, anybody who wanted to come along and see what they'd make of this new style of painting that he was teaching, this sort of self-expression. And the students at Cardiff College of Art who lived in the Rhondda and went down on the train every day, the Rhondda group as they became known, they all found out about him and they went up to see him. And their experience of sort of suddenly coming across somebody that they regarded as a real artist who'd got a real set of inquiries about how to paint and really excited them. These are artists who are finding new ways of seeing the world. They're not just regurgitating the same kind of landscape view, a little still life, some safe scene. They're saying, how do we see the world? What can we do differently from people in the past? One of the things that Heinz Koppel used to say to his students is, how would a child see it? Try and see it absolutely from basics. Try and go back to basics in what you do. And people need help to go back to basics sometimes, and both Herman and Koppel, I think, were seen as people who could help throw out some of the baggage of art and start fresh.
Joseph Herman's paintings of miners reflected a new confidence in the post-war years. These men were no longer the downtrodden figures of Evan Walters and Archie Rhys Griffiths, but symbols of a new world.
Everything changed in 1945. A Labour government was elected. The mines were nationalised. The NHS was created. Even old pits like this one in this banner of Mardy, these were rebuilt, reconstructed. There was a tremendous new sense of optimism in the valleys. When I grew up in the valleys in the 1950s, there was full employment and a tremendous sense of optimism everywhere. We were open to all kinds of influences. We were reading the novels of Jack Kerouac and looking at abstract expressionist painters in America like Jackson Pollock. And there were young artists in these communities in this valley, and they were trying to reflect the world around them, but they were painting in a new way.
Young Valleys artists like Ernest Zaboli, Robert Thomas and Charles Burton were part of this post-war generation entering art college for the first time. They no longer painted scenes of industry, but streets brimming with shoppers, lively paintings in bright colours. Gwyn Evans is one of the last survivors of this group.
Well, it is optimistic. Of course, it coincided with us younger people naturally we'd have optimism. We were going to change the world, but that air of optimism was strong. We never thought of ourselves as making history. We were just a group of committed people, and one thing we wanted to do was paint. We revelled in this sort of whole atmosphere of the Rhondda. It was in our bones. Every stone glowed, and it drove us on to paint and record what we saw. Because a lot of the art that was being produced was like a sophisticated art, whereas ours was raw. We went out and we met on a Saturday morning, and we did different areas of the Rhondda. One morning we'd meet in Treherbert. It might be below freezing. I can remember sitting in a stream, my feet on the blocks of ice, and drawing away. And then we'd retire to a cafe. Dom's was the favourite in Treorchy, and discuss what we'd done. And it was usually quite a serious hour or two.
People were looking to the future. They were looking to make a new world after that Labour government really turned so many things upside down and said, let's start again in a different way. And I think that if you look at those paintings by Charles Burton, the early Ernest Zeboli paintings, Glyn Morgan too, they're expressing quite an optimistic view of the valleys. You know, you're seeing tidy places in both senses of the word. You're seeing order and attractive rural landscapes around the community. And really that was the truth that people were seeing around them. They weren't seeing sort of poverty and destitution, which might well have been the picture had they been painting in the 30s. They were seeing a regulated, harmonious world.
It wasn't only men who grasped the possibility of the new age. Nan Youngman, an English artist and teacher, set up a scheme to show art in Welsh schools and painted a series of evocative streetscapes. Cardiff-born Esther Granger was also inspired by the landscape and its people, painting this austere portrait of a miner's wife, Con Morgan, in the 1950s. Perhaps the most singular vision of the valleys came from Ernest Zeboli. The son of Italian immigrants, he went to art college after national service. But the valleys, and specifically Ystrad Rhondda and Penrhys, became his artistic universe. When he went away to teach in North Wales in the mid-1950s, he struggled to paint, needing the landscape of his home to spur him on. As his work matured, Zeboli created his own iconography of the valleys. Often seen at night, his paintings show streets and houses clinging to the sides of the hills, street lamps and car headlights illuminating this nocturnal world with the artist himself looking on.
I think all of those artists who came from the valleys saw it as important to show their own home and express that, and they were in love with their own home. And I think that comes through very strongly in the warmth of the paintings. Koppel and Herman, they were in love with it as well, but even coming as outsiders, they did really express their feelings for the places they were. When you look at the geography of it and the amazing placing together of rows and rows of houses with mountains behind them, you know, it was an amazing picture. And so many artists coming together here just found it a place full of visual excitement.
But in the 1960s and 1970s, the valleys faced grimmer realities. The Aberfan disaster of 1966, when a coal tip collapsed on top of a primary school, killing 116 children and 28 adults, was like a curse that returned, a ghost from earlier in the century, when accidents were tragically common. The disaster was commemorated in this painting by Nicholas Evans. Evans was a kind of Valley's Grandma Moses, who only took up painting in his 60s, and whose work of monochrome miners captures the gloom and desperation of his youth underground. His Aberfan painting gets something of the grief that followed this terrible tragedy.
If the bright new future of the post-war era was fading, the mystique of the mines continued to draw artists like moths to the flame of a miner's lamp. Valerie Gans is a Swansea painter, and although the valleys were just a few miles away, they remained a hidden world to her until she began sketching there in the mid-1980s.
Now these sketchbooks are so wonderful. When did you first go down a mine?
I think it was about 1982, and I worked in a private mine, a drift mine.
Was it the sculptural qualities, the drama, the special light that attracted you to the mines?
I don't really know. It was the fact that it was almost like a forbidden place, and I've always wanted to go to places I'm not supposed to go to.
Well, of course, you went to the most forbidden place for a woman, and that's into the baths, where the men were actually washing.
I mean, you've got the wet skin, the white tiles, and the reflections and colours of the towels. It was a beautiful subject.
These are incredible life drawings. But, I mean, there are full frontals in here, Valerie.
Oh, yes.
And the men didn't mind you?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Says something about coal miners in South Wales, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I'm so used to drawing people without their clothes on that it didn't make any difference. In fact, I was in the little road next to the mine one day, and along came a lorry, and the men called out to me, and I answered, but I didn't recognise them. He said, you don't know me with my clothes on.
You actually went to live, of course, in a mining community right next to the mine in Abertillery. And how did you begin to paint that? How do you that sense of community? How do you translate that onto a canvas?
Observation and sketchbooks. And I'd go to their choir practice and their band practice and snooker halls and so forth, and they were very happy to let me do what I liked. They were really good about it. And as much as one was able to, I became part of that community. And they were really welcoming. It was a lovely atmosphere.
But the world that Valerie Gans painted was soon to change.
The long post-war boom ended for the valleys in the late 1970s. The demand for coal and steel began to decline catastrophically. The coal industry was heading for a momentous strike.
I was working for the National Union of Mine Workers during the 1984-85 strike. It's an experience etched on my memory, but little recorded by artists. Photography and film are the main documents of the time. All of these images and posters, these were all designed during the miners' strike of 1984-85 by the miners. In fact, I designed some of them myself. But you know, the extraordinary thing is that there was very little art created by artists about the strike at the time. But there was a rich vein of creativity that came after the strike. The end of the strike in 1985 saw the rapid closure of the coal mines and steelworks which had defined the valleys for so many people for so long. 30 years later, little remains of these industrial powerhouses. Tower Colliery at Herwain was one of the last, taken over by the miners and staying open until 2008. It remains empty and decaying, a memory of generations of men who worked underground. Hidden away, there's a mural by one of the miners themselves, an anonymous personal statement about 150 years of work at the site. But the passing of these industries has inspired some artists who find subject matter in the struggles of the past. Various artists in different ways have shown the valleys emerging from the closure of the mines. David Carpenini was born here in Blaengwynfi in the Avon Valley, north of Port Talbot. For 50 years, he's been portraying the people of this village as stubborn survivors. This picture is very important to you, isn't it?
Well, indeed, as a subject, it's something that has recurred many times in my work. It contains the house where I grew up from the age of 9 months, and the path here behind that building. I walked many, many times, and it is a dramatic view. It is an extraordinary visual pattern of folding forms and rhythms that I saw almost every day of my life. Clearly, things have changed over 50 years, but nonetheless, it was a dynamic, recurring, powerful symbol of a working, dynamic community. And it's firmly embedded in my psyche. I don't think there's any question about that. Clearly, I'm also doing a good deal of work in more recent times from my memory, because as you can see, it has changed quite significantly. But the excitement of one's engagement from a child with the experience of growing up here, I once described as like growing up in a fine Renaissance city like Florence. Clearly, I don't have a Piero della Francesca in my local church, but I did have every day of my life a changing visual spectacle that I have constantly found extraordinarily stimulating.
And you've never forgotten the people, have you?
No. Well, I again think that's the other issue as well. Although much of my work is about pure landscape, the majority of my work is about people in situations. And they are, as I've heard you say before, survivors. They're very resilient people. And often you find a situation where people are, I hope this comes across in some of my paintings, they're not just about South Wales. They are about a broader perspective of human experience, where anyone in difficult circumstances has found a way to survive.
David Garner also deals in the fallout from the pit closures. The son of a miner, he uses the remnants of industry to make art. Miners' boots, donkey jackets are his raw materials. All of this stuff is about coal mining. Why do you produce art about coal mining?
Well, it's the background I came from. My dad was a miner for 50 years, and I grew up in a mining community, mining village, a little place called Aberbargoed. Came out of college, Royal College, and straight into the miners' strike, 84-85 miners' strike, and started to produce work which reflected what was going on.
This piece here is an incredibly intensely personal piece of work, because this is about your dad, isn't it?
Yeah, this is very personal. My dad died of pneumoconiosis, and I made this piece when he died. It's called Do Not Go Gentle. which is an obvious reference to the Dylan Thomas poem, and that fight for life, and also the fight for recognition and compensation for the cause of death.
And that X-ray is actually his X-ray that you got from the hospital.
It's an X-ray from Caerphilly miners, which I eventually managed to get from them. They were very reluctant to release it, but yes, it's the actual X-ray, yeah.
And this is actually his jacket?
The majority of the work I make, which incorporates found objects, they have to be authentic. They have to be the real thing. There's kind of no compromise there at all. So, the jacket is his, the X-ray is his.
And his nebulizer.
The nebulizer, yeah. That authenticity is so important, really.
This piece is about one of the worst things that ever happened in Wales.
Yeah, Aberfan, 66. I was in primary school, 8 years old. I remember it happening vividly.
And these objects as well, of course, these are from 1966, these seats.
They're very old primary school chairs, which I managed to source. 30 of them, to represent a class. And what I did, I cast coal and bitumen wedges to sit on 30 primary school chairs. And the idea came from a photograph I saw where the spillage was coming in through the school window in Aberfan, and it settled on a desk and chair. And I saw that image, and that gave me the idea. Because of the nature of the bitumen, over time it moves, which was fantastic really for the narrative of Aberfan really.
It's something that people who might not be part of that art elite, that audience, they don't have to have a special language to understand it, do they?
No, they don't. That's something I'm always conscious of as well. Again, it might come from my background, that I like the person next door to me to be able to read something into the work. You're not going to read all the sort of the subtleties and maybe the detail, but I would like somebody in my street to be able to look at the work and think, yeah, that's about Aberfan, or that's about whatever, I like ordinary people to be part of the audience, really.
David Garner, like David Carpanini, is deeply concerned with the devastating after-effects of industry. But there are other artistic views of the valleys which are equally powerful. Kevin Sinnott lives and works in the Garw Valley. One of the most popular contemporary Welsh artists, his figure paintings are full of dynamism and colour, with people out in the streets and up on the hills. To me, he captures the vitality of the valleys better than anyone. Paintings which celebrate the humour and panache of the people who live and love in these towns and villages. Another artist with a distinct vision is John Selway, who's painted in Abertillery for over 60 years. Selway studied alongside David Hockney at the Royal College of Art in the 1960s, and his work has developed into a rich, magic, realist style. Selway draws on music and poetry, and his sinewy forms seem to envelop you, even when they're not directly about the landscape where he lives. They could only have been painted in these steep-sided valleys where the sky is far above. In this program, I've looked at how the history of the valleys and the art that's been made there are closely connected. but perhaps the powerful presence of the past, especially the industrial past, has now become too dominant.
Over the past decade or so, there's been a tendency to memorialize the suffering of the valleys. Monumental sculptures erected on the site of pit disasters and closed collieries. In a way, it's understandable. The mines were closed and demolished so quickly that the older generation wants to pass on what's been lost. But sometimes, history hangs over the valleys like a shroud. But people love living in the valleys, and they're beginning to regain the natural splendor that attracted artists like Turner in the 18th century.
I'm sure and I hope that this beautiful landscape will now inspire a new generation of artists to create their own contemporary visions of the valleys.
We're joining Martha Carney on a great Irish journey here on BBC4 tomorrow night at 8. Next tonight, there a chance to meet the Normans with part 2 of Professor Robert Bartlett's series, and the invaders are intent on